Papal Passenger, a behind-the-scenes look at the Pope's trip to Korea. Left stranded, the U.S. won't evacuate a group of refugees from an Iraqi mountaintop. A panda trio, these little cubs are thought to be the only panda triplets in the world. And out with the word, a directive to remove Bibles from U.S. Navy Lodge guest rooms. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 14th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. In South Korea, it's now dawn on Friday morning. Pope Francis wakes up to a full day, highlighted by a huge open-air mass for the solemnity of the Assumption. Our EWTN News Nightly team is with the Pope in Korea. Alan Holdren joins us from Seoul now, continuing our exclusive Shine the Light coverage. Alan?
Pope Francis has started off this trip, Brian, with a bang. He's calling for reconciliation in a Korea that's divided between North and South for almost 70 years now. He said that peace isn't just an absence of violence, but he called them to work actively and promote peace through initiatives, especially diplomacy and dialogue. And he said that regular people can also do this while he's here this week.
May all of us dedicate this day to peace, to praying for it, and deepening our resolve to achieve it.
So that took place at the presidential palace called the Blue House here in South Korea. And there was all kinds of other events going on around this. There was a spectacle outside on the parade ground that's just outside the front doors of the palace. We were there watching it with all of these different groups of military personnel and also marching bands, people with flags flying. It was really an incredible and colorful event there in honor of the Pope. Something that was quite extraordinary, Korean journalists told me while we were there. There was also another event this afternoon, which was the Pope went and he spoke with the bishops of Korea, and he invited them to be fathers to their priests. He told them that they should always answer their priests' calls for private audiences and make sure that they're well catered to. He also told them that they really have to take care of the poor. They need to be a church of the poor. They should not fall to the temptation of prosperity, is what he called it. They should always fight against the consumerism that might take them away from their priestly vocation. And, you know, being here and following the Pope and his every movement, especially as part of the papal flight, we really wanted to bring that to you. So we put together a little package to show you guys what it was like.
Some of the 72 journalists ready to board Alitalia Flight 4000 just over 24 hours ago, en route to South Korea with Pope Francis.
This is what it's like on the papal plane, just like any other flight, with one very special passenger on board.
Buonasera.
He speaks to us only briefly, leads a moment of silence for an AP journalist who just died in Gaza.
Preghiamo in silenzio.
He expresses his gratitude for those who bring his message to the world. Tells us that this isn't just a tourist trip and that it will be extremely demanding.
Sarà proprio molto impegnativo.
Among the journalists aboard are 10 South Koreans.
We hope that Pope Francis can give for the Korean people, for the peace of Korea and peace of East Asia.
East. The sun rises over what they call the land of the morning calm, South Korea. Pope Francis arrives with his much-needed message of reconciliation, love, and solidarity.
The Pope was looking tired, Brian, after a long day today, but he's got 4 more days left to go. Tomorrow, he's going to be celebrating the Feast of the Assumption, which is going to be a large celebration in Seoul's Olympic Stadium. So we've got that to look forward to. We'll be bringing it to you tomorrow. And until then, Brian, we're here in Seoul.
All right, thanks, Alan. We're looking forward to that coverage. And while Pope Francis is on his trip to the Far East, he may already be planning for a Western journey, one that would bring the Holy Father here to the United States next year. According to some media reports, Pope Francis replied yes when asked about asked by a reporter on the papal plane if he would come to Philadelphia. He then commented on the World Meeting of Families next September in Philly. Now, we asked the Archdiocese of Philadelphia about these reports. This is what Kenneth Gavin, Director of Communications for the Archdiocese, told EWTN News Nightly's Catherine Zeltner. There has been no official confirmation by the Vatican of Pope Francis's attendance at the 2015 World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. We still expect that any official confirmation will come approximately 6 months prior to the event, and we remain confident that the Holy Father will be present with us. Now, Gavin says this confidence is based on Archbishop Chaput's personal conversation with Pope Francis. Our team continues its Shine the Light coverage of the Pope in Korea tomorrow. Watch for more behind-the-scenes reports and, of course, highlights from that huge outdoor papal mass for the Solemnity of the Assumption. Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The Iraqi government says embattled Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has now agreed to step down. In a speech today, al-Maliki says he will support his nominated replacement. This as the UN expresses new concerns about Iraq and its people. Wyatt Goolsby is here with more tonight. Wyatt?
Brian, UN officials are calling the situation in Iraq a humanitarian catastrophe. The crisis is caused by ISIS, or the Islamic State, and their systematic targeting of religious and ethnic minorities.
Near the Iraq-Syria border, thousands of men, women, and children have made an exhausting trek to makeshift UN camps like this one. Since June, more than 400,000 people have been driven from their homes. Many are religious minorities, fleeing Islamist terrorists.
They say they have received atrocious accounts on the abduction and detention of Yazidi, Christian, Turkmen, and Shabak women and girls and boys, and reports of savage rapes. Some 1,500 Yazidis and Christians may have been forced into sexual slavery.
Some 45,000 Yazidis, one of the persecuted minority groups, were able to escape after being surrounded by militants on Sinjar Mountain. This week, the U.S. military airdropped food and water to those Iraqis. The president announced that the U.S. does not need to evacuate anyone from the mountain, sparing U.S. troops combat exposure.
Wherever we have capabilities and we can carry out effective missions like the one we carried out on Mount Sinjar without committing combat troops on the ground, we obviously feel a great urge to provide some humanitarian relief to the situation.
Some 4,000 people remain on the mountain, and Obama says airstrikes keeping the militants at bay will continue. For the families that did escape, the violence left them with painful memories.
If we were able to find a tree where we could rest in the shade, we were lucky. For the first 4 days, we had no food, only water. Any bread we found, we fed to the little kids to keep them alive.
The president today also said the Iraqi government needs to come together to stand up to the terrorists. But Brian, even getting one that represents all of the different religious and ethnic groups in the country is likely to remain a challenge.
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. And despite a rocky start, it seems a ceasefire is holding between Israel and Hamas. Israel has now accepted an extension of a 5-day Gaza truce. Rocket fire late last night, then early again this morning, raised doubts about whether the truce would last. Israel's military says 8 Hamas rockets were launched. Israel then retaliated with airstrikes on Gaza, but the exchange was limited and it didn't last long. A spokesman for the Israeli government accuses Hamas of firing the rockets and breaking the truce.
If there's no hostile fire from Gaza into Israel, of course we can have serious discussions about easing restrictions. They're only there in the first place as a response to the violence. And the wild card is Hamas really willing to give up violence?
This is the longest ceasefire to date since the latest round of Middle East fighting broke out last month. An Iowa drug developer may soon begin initial testing of an Ebola vaccine on humans. NewLink GENETICS says the vaccine has been 100% effective in preventing Ebola infections in animal trials. The company is getting some outside help to speed up the manufacturing process, making more doses available. It's still uncertain when the human trials will start. 100 healthy volunteers are needed for these trials, with the goal of proving that the vaccine is safe for humans. Meanwhile, the American developer of another untested Ebola treatment has shipped its final limited supply to Liberia. There are only 3 or 4 doses of ZMapp left. Now officials have to decide who will receive them. The drug could prove to be life-saving, ineffective, or even harmful. The Liberian government said earlier that 2 doctors would receive the treatment. Missouri's governor says the State Highway Patrol is now in charge of securing the town of Ferguson to avoid another night of violence. This St. Louis suburb has been rocked by sometimes violent protests over the police shooting of an unarmed teen U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder says the Justice Department will also help keep law and order. Catherine Zeltner has more.
The chaos has only escalated on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri. The city continues to be the scene of nightly protests after Michael Brown's death. The unarmed 18-year-old was killed by police during a confrontation Saturday. The arrests of protesters and several journalists have also fueled the fiery protests.
When something like this happens, the local authorities, including the police, have a responsibility to be open and transparent about how they are investigating that death and how they are protecting the people in their communities.
Hacking group Anonymous tweeted the identity of the officer it claims killed the teen. But the city's police chief maintains the name is wrong. Twitter has since suspended the account the name was sent out on. Brown's death and police alleged stonewalling of details has led to outrage in Ferguson. Governor Jay Nixon is pleading for peace in his state.
If people got things to say, they ought to be able to say them. And if people from the news media want to cover stuff and take pictures of things, they ought to do it. We live in a free country.
Now pressure mounts to control the chaos, as nightfall could trigger another wave of violence between police and protesters. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. And seconds really did make the difference when a Maryland state trooper was able to stop a man who was apparently ready to jump off a bridge. State Trooper Joshua Kim pulled up to a man walking along Maryland's Memorial Bridge. The trooper pulled over and was able to stop him from jumping. The 24-year-old officer then handcuffs the man for his own safety before taking him to a local hospital. Police have not identified this man. Coming up, for years, guests could count on a Bible at their bedside in Navy lodges, but not anymore. The reason for the change just ahead. And it's already Friday morning in Korea as we continue following the apostolic journey of Pope Francis. On Thursday, August 14th, this is EWTN News Nightly. Thank you for watching. I'm Brian Patrick. Does our freedom of speech give all Americans the right to display Choose Life license plates? That's essentially what the Thomas More Society is asking the U.S. Supreme Court to decide. 21 states don't allow the pro-life message on license plates. Thomas More lawyers argue that in some states, a range of other messages are permitted, but Choose Life plates aren't available. A petition filed with the High Court asks for clarification of how free speech rights apply to these specialty license plates. A directive to remove Bibles from some lodging the Navy provides to service members and their families is raising challenging questions about our freedom of religious expression. Jason Calvi joining us from the Pentagon tonight with that story. Jason?
Brian, Navy lodges are located on bases across the country. It's a place for sailors and their families to stay while traveling. And until recently, you'd find a Bible in each room. But that historic trend is now at risk.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation sent this letter to the Navy back in March. They shared the story of two service members.
These members contacted us to report that in over 2 decades of service, every Navy lodge that they visited had one and only one religious text in it, the Bible. And so that amounts to the Navy showing a preference for Christianity over all other religions and over non-religion.
And now the foundation is claiming victory. They count a release from the command that oversees the Navy lodges as a victory. It states, the Navy Lodge General Manager should advise the installation commanding officer of our intention to work through the chaplain's office to determine what installation policy is and the method to remove religious material currently in guest rooms. And it says the directive should be carried out by September. But what does this mean?
The Bibles are being at least temporarily removed from hotel rooms. And given that the overwhelming majority of chaplains on military bases are Christian, my guess is that one way or another, the Bibles will remain available to anyone on a Navy base who requests one.
But some see it differently.
It's an attempt at chipping away at the small areas of life that then might lead to greater precedents down the road.
Doug Lee is president of the Chaplain Alliance for Religious Liberty. He's also a retired Army Brigadier General.
Any faith group can request to place their books at their expense into any government facility. There's no law, there's no court that's ever said that is incorrect
And the Navy here at the Pentagon tells me that the decision to remove the Bibles was made by the part of the Navy that oversees the lodges, but not by senior leadership. They say the policy is now under review. And here's the big update, Brian. They say that while this review is underway, those Bibles, those religious articles, will return to the hotel rooms.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Our Jason Calvi at the Pentagon. Travis Weber is the director of the Center for Religious Liberty at the Family Research Council. I want to talk about this and also the Choose Life license plates. First of all, this Gideon's Bible issue. I've been in many hotel rooms. I travel a lot. Never read one. I usually bring my own. Why is this such a big issue?
You know, I'm not actually sure why it's such a big issue. I mean, the fact of the matter is these are at no cost to the Navy. These are placed there by a private organization. Folks do not seem to be getting upset on a wide scale about these Bibles, except those at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And really, it's unclear why, with all the problems going on in the world, we need to take time and energy to address this issue at this time.
So is this specific directive, though, to remove really all religious articles from these rooms, is that what's troubling here?
Well, it is. You know, and interestingly, the directive does, it's unclear in what it's trying to do, but it seems as if religious materials need to be removed. What's interesting is in the letter from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, at some points it cites the problem of Bibles, at other points it cites religious materials. I think really, you know, what's driving this is their antagonism to Bibles themselves. I find it hard to believe that they would have a problem if other religious texts were placed in these rooms too, or if it was other religious texts they were receiving complaints about.
But you heard Jason. In the meantime, those Bibles will stay until they figure all this out. Let's turn back to the Choose Life license plates. They are available in about 2/3 of the states and D.C. A third did not allow them. What is the Supreme Court being asked to consider here by the Thomas More Society?
So the Supreme Court is being asked to consider, to hear the case involving some members of the North Carolina legislature and the ACLU. Those are the two parties in the case. In that case, the North Carolina legislature had permitted Choose Life license plates. The ACLU had sued, opposing, you know, these Choose Life license plates, and now the Supreme Court is being asked to decide whether that's within the legislature of North Carolina, within their power, via the citizens and their will, their expressed will to express this message of Choose Life, within their power constitutionally. The Supreme Court is being asked to consider that question, and we've yet to hear whether they're going to take the case.
I'm very reluctant to speak for the devil here, but I do have to play devil's advocate. So if free speech as regards to specialty license plates applies here, wouldn't people be able to choose abortion license plates?
Well, that's an interesting question, and that's one question we're asking the Supreme Court to decide here. There's this doctrine of government speech, which deals with constitutional questions differently when the speech is not government speech and when it's private speech. You know, what's interesting here is that the ACLU has, in these cases when it's challenged these plates, it has not asked to have its own message expressed. Its request to the court has been to stifle and censor the Choose Life message. So really, when you get down to the heart of this, regardless of the government speech versus private speech issue, this is not about free speech. It's about censorship of an unpopular viewpoint.
From the Family Research Council, Travis Weber, thanks for coming back to be with us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, Chinese zookeepers and some adoring fans are keeping a very close eye on rare baby pandas, a trio of them. The cubs are thought to be the only living panda triplets in the world. They were born a couple of weeks ago, each weighing less than a pound. They're twice that size now and are reportedly very healthy and very cute in an ugly sort of way. Pandas are China's unofficial national mascot, so the country's devoted major resources to trying to increase their numbers. Up next, get ready to pay more for your Morning Joe, a price hike for coffee convenience. And the New York Jets are throwing down the gauntlet in the Ice Bucket Challenge, benefiting Lou Gehrig's disease research. I'm Brian Patrick. EWTN News Nightly. Your morning wake up just got more expensive. Keurig Green Mountain Coffee plans to hike their K-Cup prices by 9%. They're already expensive. The one-serving K-Cups for Keurig coffee makers are becoming the standard in most homes and businesses. Keurig also plans to raise prices for its bulk coffee and other products starting in November. The company says the hike is needed to offset a 55% rise in green coffee prices. Keurig gets much of its coffee from organic and free trade producers. Ice Bucket Seattle Seahawks and Cleveland Browns. They're also challenging New York's Major League Baseball teams, the Yankees and the Mets. As we continue with our Shine the Light coverage, we have Daniel Burke back with us tonight. He's the editor of CNN's Belief blog, closely follows Pope Francis. What kind of a message is Francis giving in this trip to Korea?
Sure, I think he's giving the message that he's been preaching since he became Pope, that this is a big church, 1.2 billion members, and that all of the focus shouldn't be on Rome all the time. A Pope hasn't been to South Korea, as you guys mentioned, since 1989. If a Pope hadn't been to the United States since 1989, we'd be storming the Vatican. So I think he really wants to get the focus on Asia, on Africa, on Latin America, where the church is booming, doing very, very well, and get some of the focus off Western Europe, North America, Rome all the time.
We talked about this before. The media kind of loves Pope Francis. He's always good news. How is media coverage of this trip comparing with past papal trips?
Well, this is definitely a tough trip. It becomes, you know, amid a really, really difficult week. You have continuing violence in Gaza. You have the Ukraine. That situation is still very tense. You have the situation in Missouri this week. At the same time, you have an Ebola outbreak. So it's a very difficult kind of news cycle to break through. Now, I have confidence that this Pope, with his kind of ability to break through media blockades, if you will, with big gestures, with pungent speeches, can do it, but it's just a very kind of tumultuous week to kind of look at.
A lot of people see Pope Francis as warm and fuzzy. You see him as tough. I really enjoyed your blog. Pope Francis is tougher than you think. How is he so tough?
Well, the reason we did that piece is there was starting to be a meme in the media about how warm and fuzzy this Pope is. You know, he just kisses babies and calls nuns on the phone, and he's just such a nice guy. We wanted to kind of push back against that a little bit, because we see him as a more complex character. He's gone about reforming the Vatican, and to do that, he's removed a number of people. As you know, Brian, he removed 5 members of a Vatican financial committee that had just been reappointed by Pope Benedict. He's taken on the mafia and the mafia heartland.
I pray for him when he talks about the mafia, because they're ruthless.
That's right. And the last time a pope did something like this, they bombed churches in Rome. So he knows the consequences of doing something like this. But he's a much more interesting and determined character than we in the media often give him credit for. And that piece is just kind of highlighting the many facets of Pope Francis.
All right. You might want to check it out. Daniel Burke joining us from CNN. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Well, we are back tomorrow on the Feast of the Assumption with more Shine the Light coverage of our Pope in Korea, along with all your news. Until then, for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you with these beautiful images our EWTN CNA photographers captured of the Pope's first day in the Republic of Korea. Good night, and God bless you.